preferred stock, and bonds, and we're looking at earnings per share as well as diluted earnings per share. We have Francis Company has 24,000 shares of common stock outstanding at the beginning of 2019. Francis issued 3,000 additional shares on May 1st and 2,000 additional shares on September 30th. It also had 2 convertible securities outstanding at the end of 2019. These are convertible preferred stock, 2,500 shares of 8.5% $50 par preferred stock issued January 2nd, 2016 for $60 per share. Each share preferred stock is convertible into 3 shares of common stock. Current dividends have been declared and paid. To date, no preferred stock has been converted. Convertible bonds with a face value of $250,000 and an interest rate of 5.5%, were issued at par in 2018. Each $1,000 bond is convertible into 20 shares of common stock. To date, no bonds have been converted. Francis earned net income of $72,500 during 2019, income tax rate of 30%. First, compute the number of shares of common stock that Francis should use in calculating basic earnings per share for 2019. So if we come back up to this original information, we see that the number of shares changed throughout the year, so we're going to need to use the weighted average. So we'll say January through April, there were 24,000 shares outstanding, and that's 4 out of 12 months. And then we can multiply the number of shares times the fraction of the year for 8,000. Then we have May through September, and it looks like we issued an additional 3,000, so we'll reference that 24,000 plus 3,000, and that's 5 out of 12 months. I can just pull this formula down to continue that multiplication of the fraction of the year. And then we have October through December. And there were an additional 2,000 shares, so we'll reference our previous 27 plus 2,000. And this is 3 out of 12 months. Drag that formula down again. And then we can do a sum here for weighted average of 26,500. So we can see that the actual number of shares outstanding is 29,000, but the weighted average for the year is 26,500. And that's the number we're going to use. And, sorry, I was trying to make that bold and it looks like I stalled out my computer. I would also recommend doing a sum for the fraction of the year, just to double check that you are at one whole. I sometimes, like when you're reading this and they're giving you something that was on, where was I just looking? Sorry, September 30th. It's easy to put like May to September, but then think September to December right here and just like quickly make that error. But if you have a check of the fractions of the year, you can confirm that that's one and that you didn't make that mistake. Part 2 says calculate basic earnings per share for 2019. If required, round your answer to 2 decimal places. And so I just put a little reminder here of how we calculate basic earnings per share: net income minus preferred dividends divided by the weighted average of number of shares outstanding for common stock. And so that means we're going to have to calculate the preferred dividend. And so I'll just do that over to the side. And there was 2,500 shares times the 0.085 or 8.5% times our $50 par for a preferred dividend of $10,625. And so now that we have that, we can do our basic earnings per share calculation. So net income of $72,500 minus our preferred dividend, close parentheses, divided by the 26,500 weighted average we calculated in part 1 for a total of $2.33. Part 3 says to calculate the diluted earnings per share for 2019 and the incremental earnings per share of the preferred stock and convertible bonds. If required, round your answers to 2 decimal places. So I'm actually going to jump down to the incremental part first, and then we'll come back and apply each of these to our basic earnings per share to determine the diluted earnings per share. And so for bonds, we're going to need to calculate the impact of the bonds after tax interest. So let me just type that out here. And we can calculate that as the 250,000 times the 5.5% interest rate. And then we know there's an income tax rate of 30%, so we can multiply that by 0.7, which is just the 1 minus that 30%, for an impact of $9,625. Now we need to calculate the conversion of the bonds to the shares. And it said that each $1,000 bond is convertible into 20 shares of common stock. So we'll say it's the 250,000 divided by 1,000, which gives us 250 shares, or 250 $1,000 bonds. And then we can multiply that by the 20 shares per $1,000 bond for a total of 5,000 shares. And so now we can calculate the incremental earnings per share for bonds specifically by dividing this after-tax interest from the bond divided by the bonds, or the number of shares we would have if we converted all of the bonds, for an impact of $1.93. Now for preferred, we can do the same thing where we can determine, we already did determine the preferred stock dividend previously as $10,625, and preferred stock to common stock, it told us that there's 2,500 shares that can be converted to 3 shares of common stock, so 2,500 times 3, and now we can do the same thing where we're saying that 10,625 divided by 7,500 for $1.42. And so now that we've done this, we can rank the one with the biggest impact and then apply that to our basic earnings per share and determine what the amount is, and see if the next one would still be diluted or if it would be anti-dilutive before we apply it to the diluted earnings per share as well. So let's do this preferred stock first, because that would be more dilutive than the $1.42. And so now if we were to change our, previously we said the $72,500 net income minus the $10,625 preferred dividend divided by the weighted average. Well, this time we're not going to apply this $10,625, because if that preferred stock was converted to common stock, we wouldn't have to be paying that out. So applying preferred stock only. So we would have that 72,500 minus 0 this time, because there would be no dividend to the preferred stockholders, divided by the weighted average we previously calculated, plus these 7,500 shares that the preferred stockholders converted to common, close parentheses, and so we have 213. And now we can see that it's diluted compared to the 233 that we calculated as basic earnings per share, but it's this, if we apply the bonds, it will still be dilutive rather than anti-dilutive. So now we need to apply the preferred and the bonds. And so we're going to have net income of $72,500 minus the preferred stock dividend of 0 plus this after-tax interest on the bonds, close parentheses, divided by our 26,500 shares plus the 7,500 preferred that converted to common stock plus the 5,000 bonds that converted to common stock, close parentheses, and we get $2.11. Oops, went the wrong way. And so our diluted earnings per share is this $2.11. Part 4 is saying assume the same facts as above, except that net income included a loss from discontinued operations of $18,000 net of income taxes. Compute basic earnings per share. You do not have to calculate diluted earnings per share for this case. If required, round your answer to 2 decimal places, and then show how the basic earnings per share you calculated would be reported to shareholders. You do not have to calculate diluted earnings per share. So let's actually jump down to Part B and do this first. So we have this earnings per share computation, and so we need to display the income from continued operations, the loss from discontinued operations, and net income. And so because this is saying the same facts as above, except net income included a loss from discontinued operations, that means that really our basic earnings per share is still going to be the same $2.33 that we calculated above, and we're going to have to solve for what income before that loss was. And so let's calculate our basic earnings per share for the net income. We already did this previously. It's the 72,500 minus our 10,625 dividend, close parentheses, divided by our weighted average 26,500 shares. And so you see we have that same 233. Now we'll calculate the loss from discontinued operations, and that's going to be, let's put a negative sign before our parentheses, and 18,000 loss, so 18,000 divided by our weighted average 26,500. For 68 cents. And so now, obviously, income minus the 68 cents gives us the net income of $2.33, so we can just work backwards to determine $3.01, and that should not be a negative number. It's just because of the direction that I did my math. So $3.01 was the earnings per share on the income from continued operations. Then we had a $1.68 loss from the continued operations to give us that $2.33 net income. And so up here, where they're asking us to calculate or compute basic earnings per share, it's that same $2.33 that we had already calculated in Part 2 and that we got to in Part 4B.